Russia has always been on the side of Africa. It has always supported Africa in its battles against colonialism. We think that with Africa in general and its individual nations, we traditionally have very good relations. I'd even call them friendly relations, without exaggeration. Africa as a whole has huge potential, and based on that, we'll continue to develop our relationship with Africa and its individual nations.
Vous avez suivi les différents votes aux Nations Unies, la position de l'Afrique.
You have seen the different votes at the United Nations. The position of Africa, despite enormous pressure, the majority of African countries have avoided condemning this situation.
Et si vous prenez aussi l'Asie, le Moyen-Orient, ainsi que l'Amérique latine, c'est dire qu'il y a...
And if you also take Asia, the Middle East, and also Latin America, you see that a good part of humanity, which in reality is very attentive to what's happening, and me, in the name of all hopes that I came to see you, to ask you to be aware that our countries, even far from the theater of the Ukraine war, are the victims of this economic crisis.
Ils sont éloignés du théâtre, sont des victimes de cette crise au plan économique. Mercredi matin, j'ai parlé au Conseil européen le mardi.
On Wednesday morning, I spoke to the European Council. On Tuesday, and I told them, yes, there is a war, the crisis, but there are also sanctions. We should work together on resolving these two problems and make sure that everything concerning food and grain supplies is outside the sanctions.
Grateful for the phone conversation when we got a chance to talk in the very beginning of the crisis, and I thank you for receiving ourselves here today, not only myself as the president of Senegal, but also in my role of the chairman of the African Union, because with me here today is also the AU Commission chair.
Targeting Russia's shipping and made international shipping companies reluctant to transport Russian cargo.
And it's true that Russia has played a huge role in the independence of the African continent, and the African continent will never forget that. So also for this friendship, I'm here. We put a lot of hope on this cooperation between Russia and the African continent, but we are also here to talk about this crisis and about its implications. As you know, a number of countries voted within the United Nations organizations for resolutions, and we have to say that the stance of the African continent, well, it's different, and despite a lot of pressure, a lot of countries did not condemn the stance of Russia, and we can also look at Asia, at the Middle East, at the Latin America, and then we will see that the world in general is following closely the developments, and I put a lot of hope into this meeting, and I came here today to ask, to tell the countries that are so far away from the conflict, they feel its consequences on themselves. Sanctions imposed on Russia exacerbated this situation even more, and now we don't have access to cereals from Russia, especially to wheat from Russia, and more importantly, we don't have access to fertilizers, because the situation, as difficult as it was, it has become even more difficult, and it leads to the certain problems for the food security of Africa. This morning, I talked with my counterpart from the African Union Commission, and I told him that there are two main issues, crisis and sanctions, and we need to work together to overcome these two issues so that food, namely cereals and fertilizers, were removed from the sanctioned list.
A grain supply tops putting African Union head talk agenda. chairman of the African Union and the president of Senegal, Macky Sall, has warned Russia President Vladimir Putin that African countries are suffering from surging food supplies as a result of Moscow's military operation in Ukraine. The talks between Putin and Sall in such Russia are focused on how to get the stuck grain supply moving again. During Friday's meeting, Sall reminded Putin that 17 African countries abstained from voting on the UN resolution condemning the invasion of Russia, despite that he described it as a strong pressure to do so. If you take Asia, the Middle East, and Latin America, it means that there is a good part of humanity which is in fact very intentive to what is happening. It is the name of all this hope that I have come to see you, to ask you to understand that our countries, even if they are far from the theater of action, are victims on an economic level, said Macky Sall. On his part, Sall sided with the Kremlin view that Western sanctions have exacerbated grain and fertilizer shortage and called for the food sector to be left out of the sanction.